Thanks, Will, and welcome to this Thought Leader Perspectives panel, where we'll be exploring what's next in the realm of sports graphics, including AI, advanced AR, XR, the metaverse, and much more. So during this discussion, we'll consider what broadcasters and production teams are asking for, how those demands are likely to evolve over time, and also look at the advances in technology that will shape the development of graphics. So let me introduce you to our panel. We're joined by Laurie Beamont, Head of Graphics Delivery at MOOV. MOOV is a virtual studio, sport and events graphics company in the UK, offering an array of services to UK and international broadcasters, such as BBC, BT Sports, ITV and Amazon Prime. Aldo Campisi is VP of Sales for Latin America at Chyron. Chyron's a provider of platforms and tools for graphics creation, including live and end-to-end cloud-native production platform with switching, graphics, replay, and telestration capabilities, and Prime, which is a platform that allows for the creation and deployment of viewer-controlled interactive graphics. We're also joined by John Kaczmarski, Director of Creative and Strategy at SMT. SMT is a provider of live data integration, real-time graphics presentation, and video enhancement solutions for live sports, and its clients include tennis Grand Slams, golf majors, the Olympics, NHL, NBA, the New York City Marathon, and CrossFit Games. And finally, also joined by Thom Stevens. Thom is Senior Director of Solution Engineering at Deltatre. And Deltatre is a sports and entertainment technology provider, offering graphics, data, OTT, and live broadcast solutions with clients such as the BBC, FIFA, UEFA, DAZN, and Discovery. Okay, so to get us started, and Laurie, we'll start with you, if we may. How would you characterise client demands at the moment? Are there any trends in the requests you're getting? Just to give us a kind of sense of what's out there in the market at the moment.
Yes, of course. Thank you, George, for having us on the panel. It's great to speak with you all. For us, I think the requests are kind of threefold at the moment. We're seeing a lot of requests for virtual studio work at the moment, and that is within, just people coming to us to ask, is this something we can do? Or it's also something we're seeing a lot more in any RFPs which are coming out these days. So it is becoming more and more commonplace, and I think because the technology is becoming more accessible now, and all the main vendors are tapping into things like Unreal, and it's a technology that's been ever prevalent for a number of years now. It's becoming more and more commonplace. So that's one thing that we're seeing. I'm sure from a sustainability point of view. Secondly, we're kind of seeing a lot of more exploration into cloud-based productions, differing from kind of remote productions where you may have hardware living somewhere that's accessed remotely, more so productions living in the cloud, and how that can be used to reduce production footprint, as well as improving the whole workflow of the production as well. So that's a second part of it. And then thirdly, we get a lot of requests for software as a service. So we create our own software tools for our internal use on projects and productions that we staff and offer services to. But we're also finding that a lot of broadcasters at the moment have vast data streams which they're kind of struggling to utilize and make the best use of. So we are developing tools that are being picked up by either broadcasters or football clubs or whoever. It takes a lot of data to kind of best visualize those data streams, and then kind of output in a way that is more bespoke to them. So they're the main three things we're seeing at the moment.
Thanks, Laurie. And John, same question to you as well. What would you say SMT is having to respond to at the moment? What are you really having to provide to the clients that you're working with?
Yeah, I'd say, there's definitely some crossover with what Laurie was saying, for sure. I think, in two of the bigger places, one probably being more centered around all the data that's just been continuing to grow in the sports industry in general. And you're seeing it more and more across different sports that hadn't always traditionally adopted it as early. So for SMT, we've developed our what we call Oasis, which is basically our system to aggregate all this data and then help stamp it in real time to be able to display that. So really looking at what we can do with this data to drive it with AI-powered analytics in a way that's more dynamic and engaging for the fan to tell that sort of story in context, right? So as you're watching a tennis event or a golf event or really any sport. We've just done some things with hockey recently, for instance, where we've kind of created a predictability for who's going to win a face-off, and sort of driving that with AI algorithms in real time is really interesting for the fan. But the challenge for us is always, how to do it in the right way to not overwhelm the viewer and allow it to be adaptable to educate casual fans, but then also be deep enough to where your traditional deep insights fans will also enjoy the same thing. So that's definitely probably the biggest one, we'd say. We're definitely doing a lot with tennis right now, trying to see where we can take that further in the industry as an example. And then the other one is obviously the deployment of mixed reality for us. So similar to the virtual, but more so in the context of a broadcast where we can display that volumetric information using that data in a way that's more analytical to the viewer, whether that's a quick replay or kind of talking about something in a pause of a moment, right, where there's a little bit of an in-between to tell that story. So those are sort of areas we're definitely exploring.
Thanks, John. Thom, I could see you nodding there, and perhaps around those points that John mentioned about data. Obviously, that's an area that you guys are quite heavily involved in.
Yeah, of course. I mean, sports data is really at the heart of the offering from Deltatre. SportX Solutions, that's our joint venture with the German Football Federation, and now going international with Major League Soccer as well. I think looking at sports data, broadcast graphics, also the offerings that we have with digital and OTT and officiating as well. In terms of what the kind of trends are, like I really agree with the guys completely, and I think you can kind of whether it's boiling it down or packaging it up with our customers, it's all this discussion around flexibility. So everyone wants to engage in a kind of flexible deployment. They want to be able to scale up and down based on peaks. Sustainability, I think, was mentioned. That's something that's a requirement. How to be able to deploy efficiently. Whether our customer wants to go on venue or they want to do something centralized or completely in the cloud. So it's about kind of creating, at the moment with all our customers, talking to them, to the new ones and with the existing ones, about having a service agreement and a delivery model in place with them that's going to allow them to change, because we've all learned from the last few years that the environment and the market can change really significantly without us having a huge amount of notice. So being prepared for things like that, but also customers really want to be able to kind of grow as their broadcast, as their season goes along, as their schedule goes along. They want to be able to, as they educate their viewers, add additional data, add additional new graphics. And so finding an engagement model and a service delivery model that allows us to grow with them and to continue to expand what the rights holder is trying to do has become something that's really central to every conversation we're having.
Aldo, is that something that Chyron is having to adapt to as well, those kind of changing business models and those demands that might come from clients in the way that they purchase and use tools and services?
Most definitely. Not only change, but constant change, constant innovation. The likes of Laurie and MOOV, who are strategic partners of ours, understand really what we bring out to the world from a portfolio perspective. Chyron is in an unbelievable position in the marketplace. And I've had the privilege to live it, experience it, whether it's from the localized productions or to the top tier things like past World Cup. It's unbelievable to see what you just touched on the change, the process of how productions of those types are being put forth. So what I've experienced, what I've seen is, first and foremost, the data acquisition, the data tracking. So it's specific to sports from a player tracking, and how we provide that to the likes of an organization like FIFA, who then further commercializes the information, the data, for both presentation, fan engagement, and also production. And the other variable that was unique is the remote side of it. So more and more, the trend is to being able to produce augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality, but no longer in a specific location. really having technology in one part of the world, like in this case, Qatar, and then production teams at the other end of the world, i.e. Miami in this case, and literally seamlessly being able to produce, interact, and almost live the same experience simultaneously. That's quite unique. I mean, this is the first time that we're really all able to work in that environment.
So would you say that the main driver for that shift towards remote production, is that mainly a cost issue?
Definitely cost comes into play. It always does. But I think it's also about the technology being at a point where it's now capable, not only capable from being able to produce seamlessly these type of environments and simulations, but also allowing people to physically be present when they physically aren't there. So you're literally engaged and experiencing the same thing, just like you and I right now in this virtual, summit. So the technologies come a long way. The cost factor is certainly important. The capability. So when you actually look at the end result, these virtual environments that are being produced, and compare them to what it would really entail to have an entire crew on premise, site survey a location that is, the bird's eye view of the venue, and building multi-level, raised floor, illuminated sets. We're looking at $1 million sets. Whereas you can easily accomplish them now in a virtual world on an Unreal Engine, to say, to name one, at a fraction of the cost. It gives you the flexibility to make changes. And as an additional value today, also this capability of working in a remote environment, so that part of your team can be in one part of the world and someone else could be elsewhere, and you still are able to collaborate 100% with one another. So that's pretty unique, what we're able to do.
And Laurie, I wanted to ask you, to what kind of extent are you guys embracing that remote way of working, and what would you say is an optimum kind of workflow for you? What, for example, in the way of equipment are you putting on site? How much are you keeping back at a remote production centre?
It all really varies depending on the project. We've done projects similar to what Aldo's been describing, but as a less extreme distance as his example, where we've done it between cities in the UK, let's say, for projects like the Commonwealth Games with the BBC, which we had renderers with us in the control room, but all the tracking done remotely, and all those tracking feeds coming through fiber down the M6 essentially. but yeah, the interesting thing with that is, as mentioned, the connectivity nowadays is so good. It makes it really easy to do these things and to be agile and quite nimble with how we approach these projects. I think another thing that's important, Aldo mentioned cost. It's the driver of everything, really, and allows us to either realize our creative dreams or put some restrictions on them, and then we have to be even more creative to come around them. We've recently launched a project for ITV Sport, which is our ITV Sports Hub. And essentially what that is a virtual studio environment, but it's done in a quite clever way in the sense that it gives them an identity for their studio, whereas before they've kind of had a studio for their Six Nations, a studio for their football, all those sorts of things, and this kind of ties it all in together. But what it also allows is when you may have your tier one broadcasts, it has an area for that which has all the AR, all the bells and whistles, all the great, 5 cameras, fully tracked jibs, and all the whole works of what you'd expect, really, let's say. But then if you've got something lower tier, let's say, that isn't going on the primary network channel, it might be at an unpleasant time of day, those sorts of things. There is a smaller, more economical area of that virtual studio which still gives you a good look and feel and keeps you within that environment, but requires less effort to get up and running and those sorts of things. And then the additional side of things with virtualizing sets is it allows you to overflow a little bit easier. Yes, you have to make sure you've got the hardware and all the licensing in place and all of those sorts of things in the green screen studio to do it in, but it means that you don't necessarily have to build a physical set which can be expensive. For a second instance, if you've got a clash, we can quite easily deploy a second version of that virtual set anywhere, as long as the hardware is there to be able to host it. So that gives broadcasters more options in how they go about broadcasting and to what level they broadcast as well, I feel.
So much greater utilization of kit potentially with those models that you've described there. And John, interested to know your thoughts on it as well. How is SMT approaching what we've just been talking about with those workflows?
Yeah, I mean, I it's a lot of echoes to what Aldo and Laurie were saying. I think the biggest thing I was kind of thinking as Aldo was talking was that key on flexibility, not only from a operational standpoint and be able to scale up and scale down as needed for any particular event, which is really beneficial. So you could keep the same quality of graphics delivery and presentation, ideally with less people on the traveling side, and still have operators available to accommodate anything. So that's a huge one. We've seen a lot of hybrid as well. We'll have our engines be on site for that kind of reliability factor, I think, in some cases, but we've also done fully remote as well. So I think that's been typically the model that we've seen. But what I think it allows is the flexibility not only to deploy it, like I said, operationally, but also graphically, and be able to change out, whether it's sets or themes or locations, to the guy's points. I think that's huge, right? So just being able to not just invest something for this one event or one-time use, but then be able to quickly change that depending on the context or presentation. I think that's really key for graphics.
And that presents an unbelievable opportunity to commercialize it. I mean, you could have one set sponsored by X brand and the next set literally change in an instant, and it's rebranded and resold by, brought to you by brand B.
So much more flexibility there. Thom, one of the points that was touched on earlier was around the amount of data that is being gathered now. And I just wanted to ask you if you can give us any kind of sense really in how that is advancing in terms of how that data is gathered, how it's managed, and how that is interpreted as well. And I suppose ultimately how that is then realized on screen in a way that is kind of conducive to viewers and perhaps not overwhelming to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the data collection and data gathering process still has those familiar elements that have been used for years, which is there'll still often be human operators watching the event and gathering some primary events. But when you combine that or augment it with the player tracking solutions, that Chyron and others have, and when you start to combine that also with the infrastructure that's being put in place for officiating, so things like goal line technology where you're having multi-camera installs, so you're gathering an awful lot more video data. You have this player tracking, you have an operational layer on top of it, and that's where the kind of machine learning and AI elements can then be layered on top as well to allow us to extract an increasingly significant amount of data. And I mean, skeletal tracking is becoming more commonplace, and the amount of data science that's therefore having to be layered upon on top of that data is increasing all of the time. So you've got all of these data points, you've got this huge data lake of information, you're applying data science to it and machine learning algorithms to it to try and extract what's relevant. And I think this is what you were touching on, then you've got to figure out how to display that for the audience. And that's a complex kind of process that we're really focusing on at the moment with our customers, because it can be done quite poorly. It cannot be done at all. That's as we consider the worst case. So we want to try and bring this data to the fan. But if you don't give context and you don't explain what you're doing and you don't make it clear, then all of this just becomes noise, and it actually detracts from the primary viewing experience that the fan has. And so that's a negative thing. I think a big piece that you have to do, and this is something that we spend a lot of time on as well, is trying to understand who the audience is and what the touch point is that they're going to be interacting with the data and the graphics. So someone mentioned earlier about kind of education. If you've got an emerging market, perhaps where that sport is something relatively new, then perhaps you want to be more educational, or you want something more consumable, something more shareable. If you've got a really hardcore fan base and that's who you're catering to, if you take something like I don't know, America's Cup or something, where you might want to really add significant depth of data, you can do that, but you've got to know who it is you're speaking to at all of those points. And I think that's the time in the design phase, the graphic design phase, the data editorial phase, and the data science phase. That's where we can really bring value, drive fan engagement, and, as was mentioned, look for the sponsorship and the monetization opportunities as well.
And so sorry, go on, Aldo.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's unbelievable the amount of real-time data that is available at this point in time. And, you were mentioning earlier the skeletal data. Apart from the fan engagement and the presentation from a purely broadcasting perspective, the value that it brings to the sports medicine, to the coach who literally makes in-game strategic decisions. From a technical perspective, the capability to automate things, moving cameras to specific points in space in real time before the actual play happens, being able to anticipate that, controlling audio for, around the field or the arena. And this is just the beginning. I mean, we're so privileged to be able to live and experience and develop this type of reality.
And something I wanted to ask you about as well. It's obviously we're all aware of the impact of gaming engines on a lot of the things that you've all been discussing so far. And we heard from BK Johannesson of Unreal earlier. How do you see the use of those gaming engines kind of evolving over the coming months and years? And I'm also interested to know what other specific technologies you think might have a similar kind of effect on all the things you've been speaking about, the virtual studios, the ability to host more in the cloud, the sourcing, the gathering, the managing, and the kind of interpreting of all of that data as well. How do you think that specific technology, so gaming engines, are likely to evolve, and then what other technologies are likely to kind of have a similar impact? So who would like to pick up on that one? Maybe Thom, do you want to go for that one? Aldo, go on. You jumped in first. Go for it.
I was going to say, really, Chyron is in the middle. So we need to be able to leverage and bring the power of the likes of an Unreal. We also understand what virtualization and cloud computing brings to the world. And it's now about balancing all of those so that we are able to empower our customers to be able to produce seamlessly, more effectively, more efficiently, while maintaining and always, not even maintaining, raising the bar, because all of our customers absolutely want to raise the bar with every new event, with every new production. So we have to be able to leverage and bring all of those elements together constantly. That's literally what we're doing.
I think that's true. I think the broadcast graphics market, if we focus specifically on that, can be it can be quite a traditional space, even if we're talking about some new technologies. But the job as technology provider, as service provider, is to help our customers keep up to date with things that are at the cutting edge or at the bleeding edge of technology. So, gaming engines are pretty much kind of universally adopted now, and we're really starting to leverage that technology. And, Laurie speaks to that really effectively. And I think then it's looking at, if you take something like ChatGPT or things like Midjourney, where you're doing artificial content, artificial intelligence for content generation, none of these technologies are necessarily things that you would just want to drop wholesale into a production. But our customers do come to us and talk to us about these technologies because they're getting to play with them. They have touch points. They're in the media. And so it's our responsibility, I think, as a kind of as a group, as a service providers, to help see where we can integrate these? Can we use them to generate additional editorial content? Can we be more real time? Can we reach a wider group of fans at different levels? And can we help our customers understand where maybe there are risks associated with these things as well? And perhaps you don't want to employ a chatbot where, a good experienced operator would be a much a better voice with an editorial eye for things.
Just going to say, I think what Thom says is, it really seems true. And I think, we have to remember that audiences these days become much more aware of these technologies a lot earlier, especially when I was growing up. I did a talk for a bunch of sixth form students, so 16, 17-year-olds, for those who may not be aware of what sixth form is if you're from a different territory. But in the session, there was a 16-year-old boy who quizzed me very, he drilled deeply into why we had ray tracing in a certain way on our BBC Tokyo set, for example. He was very aware of the technology and what's possible with it. So I think, audiences, especially the younger ones, are going to be very critical on how we approach projects and how we deliver them ultimately. And the standard is forever getting higher and higher. AI is also a very interesting point of view. I mean, it's something that has had a lot of press in recent months. I think using it as a creative tool to help generate some talking points, let's say, is a really positive thing. I don't think it's yet at the stage where you could let it churn out the final end product for you. But I think definitely in the embryonic phase of we want to do this, how should it look? And then generating a bunch of examples that could help generate conversation is a really positive thing. So I can see that. Not saying that it will put people out of work, which a lot of people are fearing, but I think it will definitely help make conversations more efficient and hopefully help get to the end product a little bit quicker, maybe in future. So that's really interesting to us.
Great, thanks. And John, go on. You were.
Yeah, no, I think what's interesting too about when you talk about game engine technology, and Unreal is obviously a big one in the market at this point. The level of power versus, for processing power for graphics display systems has just gotten more and more advanced. That is now being, the level of fidelity that we can achieve out of it has grown so much that not only in the presentation improving, but production pipelines from a graphic presentation as well, right? So even from a post-production process where traditionally we would have to build 3D graphics, rendering out times for, X amount of frames and putting all together, that technology now enables us to do things in real time for versioning. So you take a sports league, for example, that's got, X amount of teams, 20 teams, you build graphics for one set. Now you're exporting that, having to re-render for 20. Now with this technology, we can condense that time down to a fraction and still keep the same level of display and quality, really, of that presentation. So that's really changed a lot. The other thing that's interesting, I think, with the more advancements that we're even seeing with camera tracking technology in real time, we've done it for a long time, but that technology is getting even more accessible and more powerful. And so now you're able to do things that are a lot more intuitive to the viewer in volumetric spaces. For instance, we just did something with a new telitration technology, and the changeover of real time for that has gotten so much faster that now where you had to wait for a 30-second package to be displayed for a replay, now it's almost within 5 seconds, where we can put lines where the player had taken his route and what that looked like when a defender's coming in. So just ways to tell that story in a more analytical way visually, I think is really, really evolved.
Thank you. Well, listen, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. But Laurie, Aldo, John and Thom, thank you so much. Some really fascinating insights there, particularly around the flexibility and those kind of creative opportunities that a lot of that technology is offering. So it's going to be really interesting to see how all of that plays out over the coming months and years. So thanks very much for taking the time to join us. And thank you all for watching. Will, back to you.